resources, whatnot. Just with the amount of people changing the guild, with new players, players been here for a while, people who may be looking hunters into TBC. We just kind of want to go through and just do another like quick little, essentially refresher, touch up, just make sure people have kind of the tools and resources. They know how to play the class well. So anyway, if you guys haven't played with me, Dinsdale or Dins, I'm raid team one, Hunter, been here since day one. Played a lot of stuff over the years, been playing WoW since it basically came out, but Hunter's probably my third or fourth most played class, but played it a good bit. Um, Played it as an alt last classic, so I have a good bit of knowledge on it. But anyway, just some of this may be um, not not a huge information for you, not a huge deal for you information wise if you've been around here for a while. So this might be kind of basic, but gonna get through some of the simple stuff and some of the finer points, and hopefully just give you good tools, resource information to kind of help you out if you're looking for information on the class. So anyway, what are we gonna go over? Just talk to the class in general. Look at general talent builds and specs, how to gear, what stats you're looking for, how to play the class with DPS rotation, some of the tools you can use, and then some of the finer tips, log review, things you should look for gameplay wise that would kind of help you out, might help you improve. So just some general things about the class. Obviously, what we're responsible for doing, like within a raid. We provide melee buff with True Shot or 100 AP to your group. Pretty decent benefit to your melee classes. If you're running an owl or a bat, we have a debuff called Screech. Screech gives a melee attack power reduction on target. Very good for tank DPS or tank survivability, especially with the Fury Prot that people are running now. Anything you do to help your tank survivability helps a ton. We have Nature Resist Aura. Well, I mean, useful for currently AQ. Not a big deal otherwise. We help pull and kiting mobs if necessarily. Trank Shot is a required mechanic on a few fights. You pick up the book in MC. Use it in MC. Couple fights in BWL. Fight in AQ. So hunters are required to have that trank shot in order to not, wipe the raid for high damage burst phase with frenzy. Some of the things hunters do well, very good mobility. You can kind of attack and move if you manage your shot timers correctly. You have added movement speed with your aspects. Longest range in the game, 41 yards. There's a lot of things that are 30, 35, 40-yard mechanics. So there's potential to kind of outrange that. Really good survivability as a class. For the most part, you're wearing tier. Tier has a high amount of stamina. You're also wearing mail gear, so decent armor rating. So compared to a lot of your clothies, a lot of your other classes, high amount of damage reduction, high amount of stamina, good to survive. Obviously, managing threat with feign death. There's a lot of things we can kind of get around that would kill other damage dealers who can't drop threat. And target switching is very good if you position yourself quickly on fights. You're dealing a lot of damage with auto attacks. Auto attacks go off pretty frequently. You have 41-yard range. The ability to move between targets if you position yourself correctly is pretty good. Some of the bad things about Hunter though, DPS is semi-average. Scaling tails off. You don't really gain a ton of through as the tiers progress. A lot of that's because pet damage does not scale at all with your stats. So start off pretty high amount of your damage. Don't scale at all for your a lot of gear you're improving. So um, they do kind of tail off. You don't really get all the benefit from that. Dead zone can be very annoying to work with, especially for targets that have like a large hitbox. If you're talking on Nixia, if you're talking ZG, if you're talking Gazrilla that moves around a lot and has a huge hitbox, that can be very difficult to play correctly if you're constrained by the hitbox, and it can be very weird to deal with because it's the hitboxes are not consistent between bosses all over the place. So managing that dead zone very proper to do things correctly. bit limited in the buffs. We don't get a flask that really helps us. We don't get a lot of strength buffs that other classes do. So really limited on the few agi buffs. So that kind of hurts the some of the scaling we have. Heavily crit reliant. Hunters are a bit a unique spot in classic compared to what they are the rest of WoW. Like they have fairly low crit scaling from agility, but get a lot of attack power per agility. So what that means is we don't crit nearly as often as we do as we do as a rogue or something like that. And our attacks hit slow and hit hard, so they're kind of more like a caster where they're going to see pretty heavy RNG based upon several hard hitting abilities. And probably the number one weakness is AOE's is extremely weak. Like you have volley, it's barely worth using unless it's targeting 20 things. But hunters do cleave fairly well with multi-shot, so at least okay in that department. Um, a few of the things I really want to highlight on that we're probably going to reference going through this. These are pinned in the Hunter Discord, but these are some of the best resources you're going to find. These all kind of existed in 2019 Classic, very well put together, very well researched. Really, nothing's changed since. It's solid information. But Boke's guide had basically you can go down. It's got a bunch of different links into it. It's most of the information I'm going to cover is really covered in that guide. So if you haven't looked through the Boke's guide, it's very good. Um, and basically every resource that I've used to learn Hunter and presenting today essentially kind of comes through that. Hunter Discord is worth joining if you kind of want to go through any kind of chat. Um, the current stuff going on with Classic, I mean it was pretty active in 2019, not so active now, just because things have pretty much been done. People kind of understand what's going on. Skinny's list is very good. To look at also if you want to look at your BIS setups between phases, if you want to look differences between different gear setups. Um, these were these were done with the DPS sims at the time. Very well put together. Very well. Much recommend kind of looking through it for that for gear planning. I would say also with that, but always look at kind of the realistic gear setups in there will have stuff that's more attainable as opposed to stuff that's theoretical BIS. Then we'll get into is the DPS sim spreadsheet. This was also created back in 2019 by one of the big theory crafters back then. Probably the best single tool you can use. We'll be getting to that more in depth at some point. But start off with spec. This is the default spec we use. So 2031, we're really we're looking to maximize the marksmanship tree for obviously for your buffs down here and get the most DPS you can on your pet. The only flexibility of this spec really is the points you have uh,
Divine Shield.
in Hunter's Mark. Like it's only a small percent debuff or change to the AP for that, like per point. So super low value. So there's some options to put it into Serpent Sting for more damage, for Scatter Shot for a little bit of utility. But spec's pretty rigid. I mean, there's a BWL spec where you can kind of take some points out of your pet tree, put in dragon scaling, but you're talking, percent or two of damage to really make a difference for a specific encounter. But for the most part, pretty rigid spec. Just a couple points to play around with. But this is what you should be using. Also, I say if anyone wants to ask questions anytime, like feel free to interrupt me rather than just me rambling. So, but some of the big abilities, obviously a lot more than this. But these are your main PvP abilities. So Hunter's Mark, obviously, that's your ranged AP buff to the target. Should always have that up. Aspect of the Hawk is your self buff for AP and proc your squid shots. Of course, always be up for max damage. True Shot Aura, same deal. Your group buff. Aim Shot is like our bread and butter single target ability. 3-second hits very hard, crits very hard. Multi shot, that's kind of your other Your other main ability, quick cast, three target cleave. Just for the nature of hunter, the only abilities we have that actually scale from attack power are essentially auto shot, aim shot, and multi shot. That is why that you use multi shot in your single target rotation, just because there's really nothing else you have to press a button that adds damage beyond that. Of course, feign death, one of our signature abilities, full threat wipe. One of the big points to note about this is it does work off spell hit. Spell hit in classic is a 17% miss chance, so decently high probability feign death does get resisted. So always be aware of that. Um, I've definitely hit it a bunch of times, end up getting killed when you hope that you could, you kind of take for granted sometimes it does miss, and it does miss more often than you'd think. Serpent Sting is a new addition to this classic. Before it was a waste of a debuff slot because you didn't have the room for it. But we do use it this time around because it does provide some damage. There is some dead time in the rotation. You can keep it up without sacrificing your mana. It's fine to add for damage. Distracting shot. One of our, if you're asked to pull to a position, you're asked to kite a mob. Um, great ability to use because it has a bonus threat modifier. And I think it adds like 600 threat, so it's a good thing to add if you need to tag to help position a mob. One of your default abilities to go to. Obviously, aspect is our movement speed increase. One of our one of the strengths of the class. Aspect wise and nature resist. Your DPS cooldown rapid fire, 40% range attack for 15 seconds. Not a not a huge ability um, compared to some of the other DPS cooldowns, but it is solid. Does help us out quite a bit. Then, as we talked before, one of our major utilities, tranquilizing shot you get from the book of Molten Core. Um, it's the only way you can dispel frenzy for certain raid encounters. It is something you absolutely have to have to those fights correctly. At least terms of talking pets, there's really only two pets for PvE that really make good sense to have, and that is a cat, and that is an owl or um, a bat. And there's really two reasons. There's two reasons for this. Cat, if you look at the damage modifier, it does have basically all the pet classes do come with certain modifiers that kind of affect their ability to do things in terms of either being a bit more DPS heavy or kind of tank heavy. Um, Cats do have the highest damage multiplier and do have Claw, which is a spammable ability with focus. So that being said, in terms of having the best ability plus the best damage modifier, that is your highest threat option, or not highest threat, or highest DPS option. Your other option that we tend to go for would be using an owl or a bat. The reason for that is cats have a plus 10% multiplier, while owl has a plus 7. So you're losing basically 3% of, and pets can be 15 to 20% of your DPS. So essentially, you're losing about 0.6% of your DPS. But the benefit to losing 0.6% of your DPS is this debuff we call Screech here. Screech stacks. It stacks with all the other AP debuffs. It stacks with demo shout. Um, so what that 100 AP reduction it gives us is about a 11% damage reduction on melee attacks to your tank. So it is the hunter is the only class capable of bringing a screech debuff. You need about two pets on a boss with 100% uptime to keep the debuff up at all time because it is a fairly decent focus cost for the cast.
Can I
But
ask, can I ask a question real quick? Why
yeah, go ahead.
wouldn't you use a wolf with the Furious Howl?
The problem with Furious Howl is it does not apply to yellow attacks.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, that's recommended in a lot of guides, and that's actually information that's been kind of refuted and debunked. Um, so the what's the wolf? See the wolf, no percent damage modifier. So it actually does very, very low on damage compared to the other pets. And then the Furious Howl buff only affects people in range. So typically it's not affecting your hunter at all. So it's only affecting maybe 3 to 4 people. And then it does not apply to yellow attacks, so that it can be entirely wasted. And you not get the AP buff from Furious Howl. So a cat actually applies a lot better DPS in any situation than even the best theoretical what a wolf could do.
Does getting Broken Tooth really add that much to the damage modifier, like attack speed and everything, or is that also kind of
It
debunked?
it it does. It does, and I can get into that later. It does if you are running Gift of Arthas. So
Okay.
if your main tank is running the Gift of Arthas debuff, the debuff does increase damage per melee attack. So you will get um, so faster speed pets do better because of Gift of Arthas procs, but it's to the tune of like 3 or 4 DPS, which is which for an easy switch is actually fairly worth it, but it's not night and day difference, but it is a DPS increase. But anyway, here's a general spec we use. Obviously, you're gonna, not using raids, but you're gonna take your max growl. You're gonna screech or dash. You're gonna take your max speed increase. You're gonna take your damage of choice or your damage ability choice. This case on here, it's an owl, so we have screech, and then you know max resistance for your encounter. So BWMC, we have fire resistance. AQ, we're gonna have nature resistance. Nax, we're gonna have frost resistance, and then as much damage as you can get otherwise. And then here's just a few general pet management tips. If you hop into a 5-man, if you're doing if you do anything with any people at all, like always put your pet on passive. It can just cause problems. If you're in a group, always turn your growl off unless you specifically need to be getting threat on mobs for some reason. Um, One of the biggest things is these are these commands super important to have on different buttons so you can toggle them. So you should have slash pet attack commands your pet to attack, slash pet passive recalls him to you. I will say that if you do not do this, you will not be able to play the class correctly. You are the person who could wipe someone in a 5-man to get mad at. So you need to be able to tell your pet what it should be doing, when it should be doing it, and have those on separate keys that you can toggle those as needed. Know when it's not to have your pets out, like Nefarian Phase 1. If you have him out, he'll get nuked. Viscidus, obviously, he's going to die. Gauntlets, if you got to go through them, pretty more of something a nuisance to deal with, an added value, or obviously if you're bypassing any sort of terrain, always dismiss your pet. This is a tough one. Pet management in Classic is difficult. Later on, they get AOE damage reduction. Currently, they do not. Like your pet will die. They'll probably die often. You'll have to carry stacks of food. It'll be annoying. It's just nature of the business. Um, the only way you can kind of get better at that is anticipating damage. Knowing when they're gonna be sitting in a puddle of AOE, knowing when they're gonna be sitting in a boss AOE. Um, Big good ones would be like the lava packs and MC, um, the thunderclap damage in AQ, getting out of line of getting out of the breath on Chromagus. No boss abilities, and no, we need to use that slash pet passive to pull them back in. Because keeping your pet alive is, they could do a pretty decent chunk of your damage. If you're not keeping them alive, that's gonna hurt. And then, not a ton of fights. Most of them are shorter in length, but if you do have some longer ones, if you're hiding behind the wall on something like On Fire Maw, if you are in between phases on Cthulhu, you know, you can do stuff with your pet on dead time and fights, or or saying a trash pack's ending early, your pet's at 10% health. Take that time to pull it back in, take that time to heal it up. With your pet. So there's some things you can do to just manage your pet a little better, keep them alive. Like it is a big chunk of your damage. It will help if you can learn to manage that. But getting on to the big part, and we'll look at some videos and stuff on this. But uh, this is the fundamental way we're like how you should think about playing Hunter is probably 50% of your damage is auto attack. Probably another 15% of your damage is your pet. That's 65%. So your number one goal is, you know, I need to auto attack the pet. I need to auto shot, and I need to auto attack with my pet the most I can on the fight. Beyond that, it is I'm using my damage abilities when I can to do the most auto shots I can. And kind of the way we do this is, you essentially we always start a fight with an auto. Then your best ability for single targets and aimed. Your second best your ability for single targets and multi-shot. So your rotation kind of is a spell out here is essentially auto aimed, auto multi. But you always want to keep aimed and multi on cooldown as much as possible. This is an old thing from 2019. Doesn't mention Serpent Sting, but when you get to the cycle in your rotation where you have both aim shot and multi shot on cooldown, that's when you can start weaving in a Serpent Sting just to add a little damage and some dead time. There's also some options for. I mean, I'm sure people have heard of melee weaving. It's not something I've messed around with. It's not something I necessarily recommend. If you want to look at that, you can, but there's some dead time in rotation to add some damage if you choose to. But at least for currently, just sticking with Serpent Sting. The big thing to get into is, as I say here, you start with auto aimed, auto multi, then cast aimed and multi off cooldown, or disrupt your auto shots, and see clipping. One of the big caveats that you have with this rotation is what we call shot clipping, and there's basically two ways to perform the rotation. Essentially, we call that the clip versus full rotation, and this really depends on your weapon speed, and your weapon speed, that critical point is 3 seconds. So as we talk about this in here, is there's bows vary quite a bit in speed, and weapon speed matters for your DPS quite a bit more than the actual DPS on the bow. And the reason that is because of how auto shots interact with the rest of the rotation. And you're always better off with a slower bow by a significant margin, just because you're delaying less auto shots. So you're essentially losing less damage on auto shots to use your damage abilities. But anyway, the way to summarize it here is like aim shot, like there is weapon speed normalization. So your aim shot and multi shot basically ignore your weapon speed, but you're delaying less auto shots, and those auto shots will hit harder, with a slower bow. So, but just a simplification of this, I kind of wrote a TLDR for this. If your bow is greater than 3.0 speed, or 3.0 speed or better, like you're basically queuing up your aim shot and your auto shot, or aim shot and multi shot whenever you want to, and not really worrying about the auto shot timer. If you're above 3 speed, you want to make sure that you're only using aim shot after you shoot an auto shot. So, and here's the big one: slow bows don't necessarily hit harder with abilities, but they have the advantage of delaying less auto shots. Any questions on that? Because it doesn't necessarily make probably the most sense the way I explained it. guess no.
I was just going to ask about swing timers, so you're going to that anyways.
Actually, we'll get to that next. Actually, we can skip forward to that if you want to see that. But the big one when we talk that is actually I might come back to the slide before because that one's it's probably better to do this one first. So anyway, the big thing we want to use, you can use either this add-on, use weak aura, but the thing you absolutely have to have to play Hunter correctly is some kind of swing timer. And as I discussed before, here's a kind of a good little overview of this of weapon swing timer. Is the way that Hunter auto shot interacts. Essentially, there is a window where you can do work in and not interrupt your next auto shot. So you can move like these white windows, you can move within that and be fine and still not mess up your auto shot. If you do stuff within the red zone, you will. And here's kind of a good example of this. Here is, weapon swing timer. Here's a hunter using this. You can kind of see, see the cast bar kind of below his unit frames there. But you can see when it expands, the timer's open. So it's hitting at the top of the timer. So he can hit that and move and be fine and not delay his shot. But as soon as he gets into the red, it'll delay the shot. So that would be, you can use the, so essentially if you're talking full rotation, you always want to make sure that at the top of this window here, that's when you're casting on an aim shot. Multi-shot can kind of happen whenever you want to kind of fill in between that. But essentially you're trying to fit that, when you maximize here, you want to be hitting that 3-second cast because your 3-second cast will basically be about the same time as your aim shot cast. And then kind of backtracking one item. Here's some more kind of advanced cooldown or some advanced rotation stuff. And this is more if you're getting into on-use trinkets or any kind of cool trinket swapping. The link here to Boke's guide has a lot better breakdown of this. But this is kind of what this looks like if you're getting into cooldown usage. So essentially, what are we looking for to start a fight if we're actually talking cooldown? So basically, like I said, we always start with our auto shot. That's number one. Then our next one's our aim shot. Our aim shot, we're going with an on-use cooldown. Then you go back to then you go to the auto shot and get to a multi-shot. And rapid fire, we talked about this earlier. That's your DPS cooldown. Just because we can hit pretty darn hard, auto shot, aim shot, multi shot right off a pole can probably, if all the stars align, can probably do 6K damage at times. It's always kind of good to wait for getting through one of these rotations before you get too hard in the DPS. So good way to do that is you might want to start with your trinket early, but not necessarily pop in a rapid fire right away. And then, secondary follow-up on this, and if you kind of look at the link for Boke's guide here, also gets into trinket swapping, which is something you can kind of do, especially if you have the Renatakis out of ZG. Essentially, what trinket swapping entails is you can use on-use trinkets early in a fight, and then once you cycle through those, since we can feign death, and if you're out of combat, you can actually swap gear. You could use on-use trinkets, swap back to your passive trinkets you get out of DM, or the 2% trinket out of Blackmark Spire is your passive trinkets. So essentially allows you to use 2 on-use trinkets, then go through use passive trinkets, and gain a damage increase through that. I will say I've done this for mixed success. Like I said about Feign Death earlier, 17% chance to resist. So you can't always count on your trinket swapping actually working. Also, it does take time. The macros may not necessarily work the greatest in combat, so um, can be potentially useful. If you want to look for a little extra added challenge, a little extra added DPS, I'd give it a go. But it's not necessarily a foolproof thing. And then kind of getting into some general raid notes for people who've done any kind of polling or want to learn to do some raid polling. Um, it can be quite involved. I'm not gonna lie. I will say for people to play the hunter class very well, if you're helping with your tanks polling, you need to be pretty much. I won't say you need to be necessarily as knowledgeable as your raid needs, but you need to be pretty close to there. So I would say absolutely review raid guides. I would go out and look at videos if people have done POVs of polling. You need to know the mobs. You need to know where they path. You need to know the number of them you need to pull. There's some good videos out there. People have done some hunter POVs. So if you're interested in kind of learning or improving it, kind of some raid polling, highly recommend those resources. One of the best things you can possibly do if you're polling for your group, get with your tanks, get with your raid leads, know what the marks are. Ask for assists, help with marks if possible. Get with your tanks and know what they expect to pull, how they expect to pull it, how they expect to separate mobs. Um, Not something I can kind of give any great detail on it currently, but I would say if that's something you want to get better at, your best resource is just kind of learn how to interact with your other raid team members. Something that I've learned a lot in AQ. Use those extra if you get marking responsibilities. Use those extra tags on some pathing mobs. Know where they're at. It can be it can help a lot just to put something on there to keep track of them. If you're not sure on some of the pathing mobs, if you're concerned if they might kind of come back, you might get a double pull. Um, Using those extra raid marks to kind of tag stuff's a good idea. Just for general polling, arcane shot is just what we use for just general tagging, pulling stuff. Um, Used a lot more in AQ, and will be used a bit more in the future. If you are dealing with poles that have a huge aggro radius that are pretty dangerous, could kill you. Pet poles get a lot more common in AQ. Do pet poles. Just to make sure you have your pet speed boost on. Use your pet attack to send them back and body pull them. One of the things I'll say about that is if you don't have target to target shown in your options menu for your interface, it's good to have just so you can know that your target actually is aggroing your pet. I will say made this mistake a few times, especially with how difficult the pathing is in AQ. Um, if you're unsure of your pet, if you're unsure you're losing sight of stuff's moving away from you, faster you can get there. I mean, be ready to pull it back in because there's some stuff where you're gonna have 3 or 4 patrols crisscross. It's just important to make sure that you're pretty sure on what you're doing. Could lead in a raid wipe if you're not doing something like that. For general positioning, for helps with fights, distracting shot, one where Billy discussed earlier. That's what I'm usually using just to kind of just quick threat if we're splitting mobs off poles, directing stuff to tanks. I will say communication with that is very, very key. Make sure that you and your tank are at the same spot. Otherwise, no one's gonna be able to pick up a threat. If you're pulling a raid boss, you're gonna get killed really quick. Even if they are pulling right to the tank, always be quick on feign death. They could miss, they could get parried. To make sure you're putting stuff in the right place, but also make sure you're protecting stuff with poles. And And probably the biggest thing for pulling efficiently or pulling correctly is something I'm still not great at because I like to do good damage. I like to be involved in fights. You know, I like you know, you spend most of your time doing trash for most of the night. So spending time doing the best DPS on them speeds the night up. But I'll say if you're pulling, just to keep the group moving along, especially if it's more difficult pulls, like you should really care about your DPS second. You know, if stuff gets halfway dead, you should be up ahead of the group. You should be looking where things are at. You should be if stuff's in good position to pull to kind of keep things moving along. So always kind of be looking for what the next pull is going to be. You know, scout ahead, set up marks, do what you need to do. Because if doing that consistently overnight can save a pretty decent amount of time than kind of sitting and waiting. Especially because stuff at times can take a minute or two to really get an advantageous position to pull. So the more you can kind of look ahead, be prepared, helps quite a bit. And just going over just some hunter things that I use. I mean, there's a million more add-ons than this. But like I mentioned, weapon swing timer is kind of what I use for my swing timer. There you can use weak ore options. I can't recommend any because I haven't used them. I know they exist, but you do need something to kind of see where your swing timer's at to play the class correctly. Strike rotate, something I've recommended to basically everyone that I've that's been in my raid team. It's really kind of a foolproof solution for managing trank rotations. It'll show you on who's cooldown. You can set orders. You can call out. It'll call out misses automatically. It'll ping you when you're up. So very good to have to kind of make those tranks simple. Threat Classic obviously required add-on, but necessary to play DPS. For trinkets, especially trinket swapping, like trinket menu is a great add-on. It's just if you haven't used it, it creates a quick little like a 2-button thing to quickly swap out your 2 trinket slots. I like quite a bit. Item rack, managing gear sets. So I got an FR set. I got a nature resist set. I do help do the basically pull on Cthulhu where I'm wearing a nature resist set. So great thing with trinket menu is I can go in there, throw my nature resist set on, help with the pull, feign death, then I just hit a button. And I have trinket menu or item rack. I just switch to my DPS set while I'm laying on the ground where everyone else kind of runs in. But yeah, really strong item to use if you have any kind of gear sets you can swap to. And then weak cores, I'll get into some different weak cores I use later. But this is the add-on you have just to kind of use those different visual aids that you can get for all manner of things. Also, you can do some self automation and stuff like that too. A great add-on. And then Omni CC I use just for like looking at cooldowns on your bars. So if you say, hey, I'm having trouble tracking, like when is my aim shot on cooldown? When's my multi shot on cooldown? When are my traps on cooldown? When are my CDs on cooldown? Weak auras, there's ways to do that. Or if you just want a simple bar add-on that'll show the timer on your bar, Omni CC is a great tool. I think you need to do something to kind of manage those cooldowns, both your ability cooldowns and your major cooldowns to kind of make the most out of class. But here's just some general weak auras. I kind of have some links in here, but I just to prevent just dumb stuff. I have an add-on just to tell me if I have Aspen Hawk on. Yell at me. If not, put a big obnoxious icon on my screen. Same with True Shot Aura. Make sure I have it on. This is very good one for Hunter. Recommend this, especially if you're doing any of the Rock to Lark quests and you need to know kiting range. But ultimate range check will give you a very nice bar indicator of where you're standing on range. Also, number of fights in the game that you can kind of get out of range if you're 35 plus yards. Some fears, some AOE's, some various things. So being able to making sure you're at a 40-yard range, very good to do that. If you're polling, I love this add-on, Raid Mana. This will give you a nice little indicator for your whole raid team where they're sitting on a mana. If it's a particularly difficult poll, you might want to wait a decent amount. For the most part, if your raid's sitting over half mana, they're drinking, they're probably pretty good shape. But it's good to kind of get a spot check where you're at without having to like really look at actual raid frames. You just kind of see a list on the side. And Probably not necessarily hunter specific, but I always kind of run a time to die macro, just to kind of know we're standing on fights for. For instance, if you're looking cooldowns, if you're looking at various things, my number one use of time to die is if I got to pull up a on if you guys done ZG, if I got to pull up a Son of Hakar. I look at time to die and I say, hey, is it gonna be if we're gonna have time to phase this, or do you need to pull up pull up another a pool for Hakar? But there's huge amount of these. They're available for any item under the sun. Um, would recommend. Macros once again. There's a huge amount of depth in this Invokes guide. There's stuff for all around macros for feeding. There's stuff for feeding your pet. There's stuff for resing and healing to consolidate macros. There's really good quality of life stuff in here that you can kind of get rid of, a bunch of button presses. So I'm not going to get into detail on some of that stuff, but I would say if you haven't looked at this, highly recommend looking through the macro section on here. A lot of good suggestions. I will say the only few that I will say absolutely must have are to make the class work. You need to have a pet attack, you need to have pet passive, and you need to like have something to start your auto shot. That's it. Those are really the ones that are not um, part of your default commands that you need to have. Just some general stuff on consumes. These are all the consumes that important to have for hunters. Obviously, our biggest contributing factor is agility. So either a mongoose or major agility. So 25 agi or 2% crit 25 agi for an hour. For raids, always use thorium-headed arrows for raids. I just buy the cheapos off the vendor for other stuff, but big damage increase. If you want to get sweaty, Scorpock assay and blasted lance 25 agi for an hour. Um, our our winter squid, the food forest should be back fishable like in a week or two. So these are expensive and hard to get, but winter squid should be back. Should be making time to get those. Using for agi food, it's pretty decent increase. Another big buff, but not necessarily must have. Juju mites. I only use these for kind of parse weeks, but if you've done the quest in Winter Spring for Cash and Maori, the Frost Giants, decent AP buff. I forget this one way too much, but once you get, I think it's to Revered with ZG rep, Spirit of Zanza, especially if you're pulling, 50 stam's huge. Actually, that's wrong. That's for 2 hours. But yeah, huge survivability increase helps you quite a bit. Mana potions absolutely must have. I see people just looking at logs. When you see people's damage fall off, one of the first things you look at is, hey, do they have mana potions or not? So yeah, we are a mana class. We don't use a ton of mana, but if you're on a longer fight, you will use it. So if you're not bringing mana pots, like your damage will suffer, especially on stuff like Cthulhu, longer fight like that. Runes are an alternate version for mana. Very very good to use because they separate CD from mana potions. If there's a fight where you might want to use a protection potion or whatnot, good option. Plus, if it's a longer fight and it's intense mana usage, it's just an extra mana CD, so can double up. Haven't had a need for these, but there are MP5 consumables. You can use Mage Blood. You can use Brilliant Mana Oil. Maybe worth bringing if there's particularly long fights coming up, but not necessarily required for anything that I've seen so far. Probably more of a speed run thing. And then, of course, always consult your raid guides for what we have for any recommended survivability or damage consumes. Just some general gearing. This is taken from the chart for the spreadsheet that I'll get into here in a little bit. But you can see, our biggest number one thing is like agi. Agi is king, especially being alliance. We get 10% off kings. We get 15% off of ZG buff. Agi gives 2 AP and decent amount of crit. But you can see here's kind of buff versus unbuffed. You can see how much difference that 25% scaling makes. Obviously, our best stat is basically our best stat is crit and hit. They're pretty equal value. Up to basically being to hit cap, and then hit cap obviously huge thing. We need to hit 9%, which can be pretty difficult in previous gear. Eventually, it's quite a bit easier if you get decent a weapon. You can put a 3% hit scope on it. Don't recommend doing that on a cheaper piece of gear because it's very expensive. But once you kind of get that 6% hit's not so bad to get, but initial 9% can be a bit difficult. But in general, I kind of linked this site here, Skinny's Classic Hunter Gear. He basically has best sets per tier with sims. Looking through this, I always recommend looking stuff that is listed as realistic. There are some things that do sim higher. Your chances of getting them are slim to none because it's marginal DPS to a hunter to get, and it's great piece to other people. But see right here, phase 5 is kind of a current phase, but you can kind of look at some of our sims. We obviously have a best setup linked with a hodgepodge of pieces. We have our T2 set. I think most people are going for. With your basically your tier 2 8 set, plus a few upgrades at AQ. But I recommend kind of looking forward to this to kind of phase 6, kind of get your gear set up. In terms of enchants, honestly, huge thing for gear. I've seen a number of people without enchants. I've seen it kind of how much it drags on them, but the agi enchants are actually quite abundant. You get about 60 agi off gear, which is huge. You think that's 1.5 or 2 pieces of gear. Your enchants add up to a ton. You get ZG enchants 30 AP. Our ZG enchants we get for helm and shoulders are gigantic because they give us 1% hit. That 1% hit is something that is critical for us to gear around to make use of some better pieces. Like I said, like I discussed, our scope 3% hit. Crucially use that because there's not really a lot of great hit pieces for hunters. Moving like basically as you move through gear progression, you're really just getting progressively better agi pieces with less hit. So important to get the hit when you want. And then sniper scope is another enchant option for a weapon. It's usable before you have an accuroscope. This is usable basically pre-vis. Also, this becomes viable again in Nax because you can get 9% hit on your gear. So this might pop up again, but you need a pretty considerable amount of Nax gear. So could pop up as a usable thing. Probably number one tool we can get into is if you guys haven't checked the hunter pins, it's the Watch Your 6 DPS sim. Cool, the link here. Recommend kind of taking this, downloading it on yourselves, setting up your character in here. But this is like probably my number one favorite tool for anything hunter related. This was made by the main theory crafter back in 2019. It's basically unchanged to this day. It's everything the GitHub sims you can find is based upon, but this is like the definitive thing we have for hunters. For basically as an upgrade resource in a DPS sim. But the big things to look at here, I would say, really great place to get started. Come in here, set up your character. You can set up your talent build. You can set up your speeds. You can set up your pet and your speed. You can set up your phases to know the different gear. Basically, my character's in here. I have all my gear plugged. You can set up. You can go through here. You can set up your player You can set up your player buffs, the boss debuffs in terms of armor debuffs. You have exposed weakness on hunters. If you have fairy fire, if you have curse of recklessness for your armor debuffs, you can set the fight times. This will give you your dynamic stat weights. This will take your dynamic stat weights and actually show you your basically your AP value on all your pieces. You can change your buffs through here. So if I'm just running Mongoose, and all of a sudden, hey, I'm gonna run 25 damage from my score podcast, say how could I expect to add? You can look at buffing your pets with Juju Might if you want to. What did that DPS add? It'll come up here and calculate for you. But extremely strong tool. I would come in here. Um, I would I would make a character where you want. I would put some realistic raid debuffs in here. Most people are running Sunder armor. If you're running exposed armor, you can add that in. Like we talked about, we mentioned before. We talked about pet speed. You know, Here's Gift of Arthas. Gift of Arthas and pet speed. This will increase. Say my pet goes from 1.0 speed to 2.0 speed. There you go. My pet damage decreased, and that was due to Gift of Arthas. Next thing we'll go over, I just want to kind of talk through some logs, and kind of just go through some general things I'm looking for. So if you kind of guys have dived into World of Warcraft logs, if you're kind of looking to improve your performance, your character, a few things. Here's kind of what I'm looking for to see if someone's performing well. Number one, activity time is first place I look. On a standstill tank and spake fight, 90% is a pretty good number. This could vary quite a bit if it's a target switching fight, if it's a fight like a Thune where there's dead time, if it's twins, you're sitting around waiting for teleports. Could be all over the place, but for just for standard, I can DPS this fight from being the end. 90% is pretty good. Same deal with your pet. If you're damaging 90% of the time, your pet should probably be there 90% of the time. 15% of your damage. This could be as high as 20% if you're MC geared, but 15% is about the number right now. And then number one, the next thing we look for is we look through ability counts. Here's just a general number I kind of came up with. So if we have a 3.4 speed BW elbow, 1 minute of fight, that number works out to about 20 auto shots, 6 aim shots, 5 multi shots. I'll kind of reference back to this, but you can verify what your ability count should be in the DPS calculator. Always look at debuffs. If there's something off your damage, are your armor debuffs there? We are 100% physical DPS class. So if you're not getting your Curse of Recklessness, if you're not getting your Fairy Fire, if you're not getting your Sunder armors, that's huge difference to your DPS. Huge ones, world buffs. World buffs, I've simmed with and without them. They're 25% damage. So yeah, if you're not world buffing, like that's a big chunk you're gonna lose. As I discussed earlier, we have high stam, we have feign death. We can live with our world buffs quite a bit better than the classes. So, your goal should always be trying to survive those world buffs. And one of the things that's a bit annoying my hunter class is we crit hard, we hit slow, we hit very hard. We're only at probably 30-some% crit rates, which is not huge compared to some other classes. So you can get some pretty big RNG on fights. So always look at your crit numbers are what you're expecting. And I can kind of give you here's an example. One of my fights, this was last week. I Parson 84. This is Oro Parson 84, which necessarily wasn't that great for me compared to some of the fights some of the times I've had in that fight. When am I looking at the log? I'm coming in here. What's my uptime? I'm 92%. That's not bad. Look at my auto shots here. So I'm at 26 auto shots. I'm at 7 aim shots. I'm at 7 multi shots. If you kind of look at my damage here, got started late. I think this fight we had a little bit of weird positioning coming in, so probably lost some shots in here I should have got. But nice little tool, kind of talked about the spreadsheet here. So we we timed this out here, minute 25, so we're about 90-second fight. So I can come in here, Oro. I can set my fight time. So what are we thinking? 29, 9, and 7 is kind of what we're looking at for what I should expect for that fight. So what did I manage to do? So I had 26, 9, and 7. So I could have gotten in probably a few more auto shots. Could have gotten a couple aim shots. I was okay on multi shots. So I probably obviously missed some through here that kind of held me back. I mean, also, that shouldn't kill me that much. Like, my DPS probably could have been a decent bit higher on here. It's like, oh, what's an issue here? Well, also looking back, what's my expected crit rate? Against the boss with buffs, I'm at 35%. So looking back here, no crits on aim shot, low crit on auto shot, basically half the crit rate I'm expecting on multi shot. So very quickly there, just kind of looking at what happened, what's expected. I can kind of come up with some reasons for why this might not have been what I was expecting. But yeah, not like biggest things to look at always, what am I doing? Activity time when we talk it is essentially, out of that percent of fight, what percent of that fight are you doing stuff? So if it's low, obviously your damage is going to be low. Then next thing we look at is inside my time of that stuff, am I doing the right stuff? So in this case, was active for quite a bit of time, missed a few activities I could have used, should have used. Issues due to some positioning here, and even then, still had some bad crit luck, but wasn't bad. Could have been better. You can kind of see here's kind of the parts I highlighted are nice to look at. You can kind of you can set your fight duration, you can set your uptime, set your debuffs, and then you can kind of know what to expect in that fight. This is a great thing to check to kind of circle back and say, hey, was I doing that fight what I think I could have done or should have done? And here's some general tips. Just want to go through that I've seen some from log review. I would focus on if you were looking to improve. I would look through this.